Between the 12th and 15th centuries, various Northern European nations launched military expeditions around Northern Europe to convert the pagan inhabitants of the land. These missions not only aimed to spread Christianity, but also sought to expand political influence and control over the region's strategic trade routes. But the Northern Crusades weren't one unified effort to spread Christianity. Northern European powers launched expeditions on a need-to-do basis, for lack of a better word. This video will cover events from the Kalmar expedition to the Danish Crusades. The Vikings of Northern Europe converted to Christianity around the 11th century. However, there were still pagans in Scandinavia, notably in Småland and Åland. And so, in 1123, the Kingdom of Norway, under Sigurd the Crusader, successfully forced Christianity onto the people and seized 1,500 cattle and many other valuables. While this particular crusade wasn't noteworthy, its successor certainly was. From 1140 to 1143, before the start of the crusade, Count Adolf II of Holstein and Henry of Badewide invaded Vagria and took control of Palavian settlements, eventually founding Lübeck and Ratzeburg. Their conquests encouraged German settlement and missionary activity in the region. Ultimately, the trigger of the Wendish Crusade was the fall of Edessa in 1144. This setback caused Pope Eugene III and St. Bernard to call for another crusade, the Second Crusade. While in Frankfurt, St. Bernard learned that many North German Saxons were hesitant to join his call, as they were worried about pressing matters back home, the Palavian Slavs, also known as the Wends. He spoke with the Pope, and on April 11, 1147, the Pope issued a papal bull known as the Divina Dispensazione, allowing the North German nobles to wage holy war on the Wends. Hearing about this call, Niklot, chief of the Obotrites, invaded Vagria and decimated newly established villages. This decision had the inverse effect of legitimizing the Wendish Crusade.
Oh no!
Adolf II made peace with Nicola after expelling the Obotrites from his territory, and the rest of the Crusaders, Canute V and Sven III of the Danes, Archbishop Adalbert II of Bremen, and Henry the Lion of Saxony, turned their attention towards Doben, which is Obotrite, and Demmin, which is Lutzian. They were another pagan people. However, the Danes were defeated by Niklot, and the Archbishop and Henry the Lion continued the siege of Doben. They ended the siege after the city's garrison agreed to a baptism. As for Demmin, the Saxons led an army commanded by a variety of bishops, including those of Mainz, Halberstadt, Munster, Merseburg, Brandenburg, Olmütz, and Heidelberg. As not only did they want to convert the pagans, they wanted to secure more land for the dioceses. However, when the siege failed, the Crusaders destroyed a pagan temple and castle at Malchow, and some of the Crusaders invaded the already Christian Pomerania. In fact, the Crusaders only dispersed after meeting with the Bishop and Duke of Pomerania, ending the Wendish Crusade. From a conversion standpoint, it was a failure, as Nicola still retained control of his land and faith. However, many of these Crusaders obtained Slavic lands, which paved the way for German colonization of the region. So, the results are a relatively mixed bag. Before I begin, it's important to note that historians debate the authenticity of the First Swedish Crusade, yet it's still worth mentioning. According to legend, the Swedish king, Eric IX, and the English bishop, Henry of Uppsala, invaded Finland after constant raiding by the Finns. This marked the beginning of Swedish rule over Finland. The only non-Swedish source that mentions this crusade is the First Novgorod Chronicle, which claims that in 1142, a Swedish prince and bishop, along with the 60-ship fleet, plundered 3 Novgorodian merchant vessels. The other biggest problem about this crusade is its timing. Start dates vary wildly, including almost every year in the 1150s, most prominently 1150, 1155, 1157, and 1158, while some claim 1153, 1154, and 1156. Regardless of authenticity, the First Swedish Crusade is worth mentioning, if not for accuracy, for its lead up to the Second Swedish Crusade, which I will go into detail about another time. Sorry to disappoint literally everyone, but we also don't know too much about the Danish Crusades. But we do agree that there were 3 Danish Crusades in total, All we know about the Danish Crusade of 1187 comes from Ezra Snare, who mentioned a great victory over the Finns in his Christmas feast speech. The Danes launched more crusades in 1191 and 1202, the latter led by Anders Sunesson, the Archbishop of Lund. To wrap things up, these early crusades, barring the Wendish Crusade, are generally underwhelming, but don't worry, the next one is going to be better. The Livonian Crusade, an adventurous campaign to convert the pagan tribes of the Baltic region, is right around the corner. Stick around for part 2, and until then, have a good day. It's important to know that every other crusade mentioned occurred in modern-day Finland, Germany, or Poland. However, there was one last major pagan region, the Baltic. Before the arrival of Catholic crusaders, the pagan tribes fought with the Russian principalities, the Danes, and the Swedes. These pagans formed a barrier between the Catholic West and the Russian Eastern Orthodox. The Baltic tribes resisted the influence of both Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy for many years, maintaining their ancient traditions and belief systems, but this wasn't bound to last. Catholicism entered the Baltic in 1180 when Saint Meinhard arrived at the mouth of the Daugava River, in modern-day Latvia. In 1195, Popes Celestine and Innocent III issued a call to crusade against the Baltic pagans. Quick side note, the Livonian Crusade was broken up into multiple phases as the Crusaders focused on converting different Baltic tribes. The first part, from 1198 to 1209, was focused on the Livonians and Latgalians. This call was accepted by Berthold of Hanover, Bishop of Livonia, who landed in Latvia in 1198. He scored an early victory against the Livonians, not before having a lance thrust into his back, swiftly killing him. Ultimately, his forces were eventually defeated by the Livonians. In 1199, Albert of Riga arrived in the region and established the city of Riga. In 1201, he established the Bishopric of Riga, which succeeded the Bishopric of Livonia. The following year, he established the Livonian Brothers of the Sword to help the Crusaders convert the population. The Livonian Brothers of the Sword would eventually merge with the Teutonic Order, but that won't be for a while. Regardless, the German Crusaders would increase their presence in the region until the native Livonian population, led by Kalpo of Tureda, decided to revolt. This revolt failed, as Kalpo's forces were defeated at Tureda, and the Crusaders declared the Livonians to be converted. Kalpo had proved to be an ally of the Crusaders until his death at the Battle of St. Matthew's Day in 1217. In 1208, Albert of Riga's campaigns saw the capture of Salaspils, Koknes, and Selpis Castle, and the rulers of the Latgalian counties of Talava, Satakl, and Alatin allied with the Livonian Brothers of the Sword. Finally, in 1209, Albert of Riga captured Jersica, the capital of the Latgalian Principality of Jersica, and he forced the submission of its leader, Visvaldus. All of this land went to the Archbishopric of Riga, and, at Albert's request, Pope Innocent III dedicated the Baltic to the Virgin Mary, and the name Terra Mariana, Mary's Land, quickly rose. As the Crusaders consolidated their control over the Livonians and Latgalians, they turned their eyes north to Estonia. Estonia was divided into counties, each led by an order. These counties were centered around countless hill forts. Unlike the centralized authority of Terra Mariana, these counties were extremely decentralized and worked independently from one another. However, in 1211, the Estonian tribes rallied around Lembitu, the chief of Sakala County. Early on, both sides raided each other until they declared a truce, which lasted from 1213 to 1215. The Crusaders scored a resounding victory at the Battle of St. Matthew's Day in 1217, killing Lembitu, while also losing Kalpo of Tureda. While the Livonian Brothers of the Sword were campaigning in the Baltic, the Danes and Swedes, eager to expand, attempted to gain a foothold in the region. In 1218, Albert asked the Danish king Valdemar II for help. However, Valdemar made a deal with the Livonian Brothers of the Sword, and in 1219 he arrived in Estonia and established a castle that would eventually become the city of Tallinn, and defeated the Estonians at the Battle of Lindenice. In 1220, the Swedes attempted to conquer part of Estonia, but were defeated by the Estonians at the Battle of Lehula, and the rest of northern Estonia fell under Danish rule. Unfortunately for the Crusaders, the Estonians would rebel in 1223, and all but Tallinn would fall. The next year, however, the Crusaders would reconquer all but the stronghold of Tarbata, modern-day Tartu, which was defended not only by the Estonian rebels, but also by 200 Novgorodian mercenaries led by Vyachko, who was promised by the Novgorod Republic all the land that he was able to conquer. However, the Crusaders would recapture the city, slaughtering every defender, including Vyachko. Nowadays, he's immortalized in Tartu. Also, in 1224, the land of Terra Mariana fell under the jurisdiction of the Roman Catholic Church, and Pope Honorius III sent William of Modena to govern it. Finally, in 1226, William of Modena negotiated peace, ending the conquest of Estonia. Well, the Crusaders didn't initially conquer all of Estonia. The county of Sarima held out until 1261. In 1227, the Livonians conquered it, lost it in 1236, reconquered it in 1241, and faced a rebellion in 1261. Don't worry, they reconquered it again. Taking the clock back to 1240, the Crusaders attempted to push east beyond Lake Peipus. You see, in the east lay the Novgorod Republic, a powerful Eastern Orthodox state, and the Voshians, a people who paid tribute to the Novgorodians. While not technically pagans, they weren't Catholic, and so they were on the Crusaders' radar. This campaign didn't go too well. Initially, the Crusaders secured some land, constructed a castle in Koporye, and collected tribute from the locals. However, the Novgorodians, under Alexander Nevsky, defeated the Livonians, and they fled. Novgorod then forced the Crusaders to fight by pillaging their territory, and they formed up and lost at the Battle on the Ice in 1242, permanently halting eastward expansion. All in all, this campaign was humiliating for the Livonian Order, and an all-around success for the Novgorod Republic.
Woo! Yeah, baby! That's what I've been waiting for. That's what it's all about. Woo!
After the subjugation of the Estonians, the Livonian Brothers of the Sword turned their gaze south to the Curonians. Before their invasion, the Livonians and Curonians conflicted with each other. In 1210, the Curonians attacked, but failed to capture Riga. They tried once again with the Slimigalian allies in 1228, but failed. However, they were able to destroy a Livonian monastery. Thankfully, for the Crusaders, in 1230, the Northern Curonians under the leader Lamicans made peace with the Livonian Brothers of the Sword, and their land fell under Crusader control. But before I continue, I want to give some important information regarding the Livonian Brothers of the Sword around this time period. In the 1230s, under the leadership of Vulcan, the Order suffered from strained financial resources, decreasing manpower, and a deteriorating relationship with the Pope and Holy Roman Emperor, who conflicted with the Order's actions in Estonia. In 1236, Pope Gregory IX called a crusade against the pagan Lithuanians, and the Order was hesitant to accept this call, familiar with their issues and unfamiliar with the geography of Lithuania. However, on behalf of the Pope's insistence, the Order was eventually accepted this call and marched south. This army was large, around 3,000 soldiers led by Master Vulcan, and composed of soldiers from across Terra Mariana. This army pillaged and raided many pagan settlements, and as they marched northward, they camped in a swamp for the night to avoid losing their horses and their terrain. However, the next morning, the Lithuanians attacked, and it wasn't pretty. The Livonian Rhyme Chronicle states, more heathens arrived. The next day, the Christians thought to ride away early, but they had to fight the pagans, though they did not want to. In the swamps, they could offer but weak resistance, and they were cut down like women. I lament the deaths of so many heroes who were so easily slain. The master and his brothers put up a heroic defense until their horses were slain, and even then fought on foot and felled many men before they were vanquished. Finally, and with great difficulty, the Lithuanians felled them with long spears. The Battle of Saul was an overwhelming defeat. Only every 10th Crusader successfully returned to Riga, and in 1237, these remaining Crusaders were forced to join the Teutonic Order. From this point on, the Livonian Brothers of the Sword ceased to exist. They were now the Livonian Order, an autonomous chapter of the Teutonic Order. Taking the clock forward, in 1260, the Crusaders suffered another defeat at the Battle of Durb, which led to many Curonian and Prussian uprisings, all of which weren't subdued until 1266. In the end, the Crusaders incorporated the Curonians at the cost of granting the remaining local nobles some autonomy. Now, the Livonian Order needed to convert one last people, the Semigalians. The struggle with the Semigalians was the final and most prolonged conflict of the Livonian Crusade. Interestingly, the Semigalians were once allies with the Crusaders. However, in 1219, the Crusaders broke their alliance and invaded them. In 1228, with their Curonian allies, they assaulted Riga and destroyed the Daugavgrīva monastery. As a result, the Crusaders invaded them, and in turn, the Semigalians attacked the land surrounding the Askrayulki hill fort. Also, while the Crusaders were retreating from the Battle of Saul in 1236, the Semigalians attacked some of the fleeing men. Thankfully, in 1254, the Livonian Order partially subdued the Semigalians after they ended their regular attacks. Unfortunately, in 1270, working alongside Danish, the Grand Duke of Lithuania, the Semigalians assaulted Livonia and Saaremaa, and at the Battle of Karusi, they defeated the Livonians, killing their master, Otto von Luderburg. In 1287, the Semigalians attacked the stronghold of Ixkill in the surrounding lands. However, as they returned home, they were caught by a Crusader army, and the Battle of Garoza began. This was a resounding defeat for the Livonian Order, and its master, Wilhelm von Endorf, was killed in combat. This would be the last time they scored a victory over the Livonian Order. Throughout the 1280s, the Livonians started a massive campaign against the Semigalians by destroying their fields, spreading famine across their territory. About 100,000 Semigalians would migrate into the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, and some of the land would fall under their jurisdiction. Regardless, by 1290, the Livonians subdued the Semigalian, officially ending the Livonian Crusade. In conclusion, spanning from 1198 to 1290, the Livonian Crusade was a long and arduous campaign to subjugate the pagan tribes of the Baltic. Compared to the mixed results of the Danish Crusade, the outcome of the Livonian Crusade is clear: Christianization of the Baltic. But, simultaneously, while the Livonian Brothers of the Sword were busy, the Teutonic Knights and the Kingdom of Sweden were busy converting other pagans. Stay tuned for part 3, the Prussian Crusade. Until then, have a good day. In the 13th century, while the Livonian Brothers of the Sword were campaigning in the Baltic, the Teutonic Order arrived from Prussia and launched a campaign that saw the total conversion and destruction of the original Prussian identity. This campaign not only established the Teutonic Order's dominance in the region, but also led to significant cultural and societal changes that would shape the area for centuries to come. Historians refer to these pre-Teutonic Prussians as Old Prussians. However, I may use both terms interchangeably, so please, keep that in mind. The Prussians conflicted with their Christian neighbors as early as the 10th century. In 997, the Polish Duke and later King Boleslaw I sent Adalbert to Prague to convert the pagans. He achieved limited success before his murder on April 23, 997. Boleslaw tried again in 1008, sending Bruno of Kerfurt. He had slightly more success, converting a pagan named Netmer. However, just like his predecessor, he was executed in 1009. In 1015, Boleslaw launched a campaign against the Prussians, devastating them. Over the following 2 centuries, the Poles and Prussians would fight each other as the Poles attempted to subdue the natives, and the Prussians would launch reciprocal raids to capture slaves. In 1206, Christian of Oliva was sent to convert some of the pagans, and he had more success. However, in 1215, the Prussians restarted their invasions of Christian lands. Having had enough with these attacks, Pope Honorius III called for a crusade against the Prussians in 1217. Hearing about this, the Prussians attacked and plundered 300 churches and cathedrals in revenge. Conrad of Masovia attempted to, but failed to subdue the Prussians, so he paid them off. In 1219, the Crusaders began to gather in Masovia, and in 1222, they were aided by the joining of nobles like Henry of Silesia. The next year, however, the Crusaders left, and the Prussians returned to the usual tactics of raiding Christian land, forcing Conrad to flee to Pluck. Sick of all this, in 1225, with the help of Christian of Oliva, Conrad of Masovia formed the Order of Dobrzyń. This order was incredibly small, comprising only 15 knights, and after a Prussian counterattack, it was decimated. Safe to say, Conrad was unhappy.
What? No, dude!
In 1226, with the permission of Conrad of Masovia, Christian of Oliva negotiated with Hermann von Salza, Grand Master of the Teutonic Order, for the resistance against the Prussians. Some quick history. The Teutonic Order was founded in 1190 at Acre, a city in the Holy Land, where it originally managed a hospital. In 1211, under the invitation of the King of Hungary, the Teutonic Order went to Hungary to defend Burzenland from the Cumans. While in Burzenland, the Teutonic Order constructed settlements to help maintain their war effort. As these settlements grew, King Andrew II became concerned that he was losing influence. After further autonomy was granted to the order by Pope Honorius III, he expelled them from his kingdom. With permission from the Pope as part of the Golden Bull of Rimini, the Teutonic Order was given control of the Kalmar land, and any other territory they were able to conquer. So, in 1230, the Teutonic Order began to arrive in the region. After arriving, Hermann dispatched Conrad von Landsberg to Masovia. He founded the castle of Vogelsang and began raiding Prussian tribes along the Vistula River. Reinforcements arrived under Hermann Balk later in the year. The first campaign was against the Pomesanians. The Crusaders advanced from Nassau and captured Thorn and Kulm. The Pomesanians would eventually be subdued in 1236 with the aid of Henry the Illustrious. In 1231, Pomesanian leader Pevin attempted the siege on Thorn, but this failed and he was captured and executed. The order gained 5,000 veterans, led by the Burgrave of Magdeburg as part of Pope Gregory IX's call, and, in the summer of 1233, led a 10,000-strong army, invaded Pomesanian land, and established a fortress at Marienwerder. From the winter of 1233 to 1234, the Crusaders invaded the Pomesanians, defeating them at a battle on the Sergian River, and constructing a fort at Raiden. In 1235, this conquered land was divided between the Teutonic Order and Christian of Oliva's bishopric, and, as part of a papal bull, they incorporated the remnants of the Order of Dobrogen. All these decisions angered Conrad of Masovia, who cut off aid to the Crusaders. In 1237, following the disastrous Battle of Saul, the Teutonic Order incorporated the remnants of the Livonian Brothers of the Sword, and, with 2 large railroads supplied to them by Henry the Illustrious, the Crusaders finally subdued the Pomesanians. They settled the region, founding Elbing, whose initial population came from Lübeck, and Kreisberg, which is intended to protect the land east of the Marienwerder fortress. Between 1238 and 1240, the Crusaders campaigned against the Bartians, the Tangians, and Warmians. In 1239, while besieging Honida, a Warmian fortress, a small Crusader force was slaughtered, prompting Dietrich von Bernheim to return with the larger army. Interestingly, when the Warmian commander, Kodrun, suggested that they convert to Christianity, Honida's garrison slaughtered him, and Dietrich was easily able to capture the fortress. Finally, under Otto I, the Bartians and the Tangians were subdued. Just a heads up, the First Prussian Uprising is a relatively detailed topic in its own right, so what I'm about to tell you is a relatively quick summary that goes over the main points while not boring you with all the extra irrelevant details. The Teutonic Order's rapid conquest of the Prussian tribes along Swedopelk II, the Duke of Pomerania, and so he collaborated with the conquered tribes to lead an armed rebellion against the Crusaders. They were quickly overwhelmed and were forced to retreat to the castles, which, due to the Prussians' lack of siege weapons, were safe. To make matters worse, Swedopelk attacked and defeated the Teutonic Order at the Battle of Rensen, nearly capturing Kulm. However, in a sneaky move, the Crusaders used politics and diplomacy to weaken the Pomeranian-Prussian alliance, and in 1248, the Pomeranians ceased their alliance with the Prussians. In 1249, the Treaty of Kreisberg was signed, ending the First Prussian Uprising. However, peace wasn't effective immediately, and the Crusaders learned this the hard way after their defeat at the Battle of Kruken. Regardless, the Teutonic Order was able to hold on to Prussia for now, but this wouldn't be the last time they had to fight off an uprising. For now, however, they could resume their conquests. After the Teutonic Order subjugated their conquered tribes, they turned their gaze north to Somland, a territory that got its name from the Samians, another old Prussian tribe. In 1252, Commander Heinrich Stang crossed the Vistula Lagoon to attack Remuva, a pagan place of worship in western Zambia. However, he was defeated and killed by a Samian force near the village of Gurmau. To make up for this loss, the Pope and Papo von Osterna, the Grand Master of the Teutonic Order, called for a crusade against the Samians. In the meantime, the Galindians, another old Prussian tribe, were resisting the rule of the Teutonic Order, and so had their power greatly, but relatively peacefully, reduced. This desire for peace came from a fear that excessive control would force the Prussians to flee to Poland and convince its leader to resist the Order's expansion. This call to a crusade was accepted by many, and the Crusaders amassed an army of 60,000 soldiers. In 1255, this army marched into Zambia and defeated them at the Battle of Rudau. The city's garrison quickly surrendered and accepted a baptism. The Crusaders quickly captured Kedenau, Valdu, Cayman, and Tapayu, and forced the garrisons to convert, and in less than a month conquered Samland. The Order then founded Königsberg, modern-day Kaliningrad, Braunsberg, and Wehlau to have controlled the native population. This string of success was nice, but it was about to crumble. Just like its predecessor, the Great Prussian Uprising is a relatively detailed topic in its own right, so what I'm about to tell you is a relatively quick summary that goes over the main points while not boring you all with extra irrelevant details. The Teutonic Order's hold over Prussia was tenuous, and all it needed was one trigger, one event to encourage a series of uprisings. This trigger came from the Livonian Order's defeat at the Battle of Durb in 1260. The Prussians were motivated to rise against the Teutonic Order, viewing these defeats of the Crusaders as a validation of their pre-Christian beliefs. Initially, the Teutonic Order had many of its castles destroyed, and it lacked important reinforcements as many other soldiers were fighting in the Holy Land, and the German states of the Holy Roman Empire were bogged down in an imperial succession crisis. To make matters worse, the few reinforcements that did arrive were defeated at Pokavritz in 1261 by Hercus Monte. Thankfully, in 1265, Albert the Tall and Henry the Illustrious arrived with reinforcements, and in the following year, Otto III and John I arrived with more reinforcements. To commemorate their arrival, the Teutonic Order constructed the castle of Brandenburg. In 1271, on the bank of the Dargune River, the Prussians assaulted the Crusader army. While it was a stalemate, the Crusaders lost 12 knights and 500 men. The Prussians immediately assaulted Kreisberg, but as they were looting the area surrounding the city, a Crusader cavalry unit from Elbing assaulted their infantry, killing many Prussians. From 1271 to 1272, an army led by Count Dietrich II besieged and captured a Nantian castle, decimating the local resistance. Hercusmont, who years ago decimated a Crusader army, was forced to flee, and in the following year was captured and executed. The last Prussian leader, Galap of Wormians, was captured and killed while sieging Brandenburg, and the only tribe still resistant to Crusaders was the Pogasanians, who ambushed the garrison of Elbing. Finally, in 1274, the Crusaders captured the rebels' headquarters at Hillsberg, ending the Great Prussian Uprising. The Prussians would never again resist the Teutonic Order, and eventually they would assimilate into the Order's German culture. So, in conclusion, the Prussian Crusade was an equally long and arduous campaign to subdue the old Prussian tribes. In the end, it was a resounding success, as the Teutonic Order was able to eradicate the old Prussian identity, and from this point onwards, the Prussians would become Germans, losing their Baltic heritage. From this point, there are only a few more crusades to talk about: the Second and Third Swedish Crusades, and the Lithuanian Crusade. Stick around for part 4, the Second and Third Swedish Crusades, and until then, have a good day. Scandinavia at this point was Christian. Well, almost all of Scandinavia was. To the east, the Finns continued to worship their pagan gods. In part 1, I talked about the First Swedish Crusade in the 1150s. However, there's just one issue. Its historical accuracy is debated. Thankfully, these next two crusades, the Second and Third Swedish Crusades, have more historical legitimacy. Let's begin with the second one. Some quick background. After the disputed First Swedish Crusade, Bishop Henry of Uppsala began establishing the Catholic Church's presence in the region. However, traditionally attributed to January 20th, 1156, he was murdered by a Finnish pagan named Lolli. The Catholic Church would later venerate Bishop Henry. In general, the Finns were extremely troublesome for the Catholic Church, so much so that in 1171, Pope Alexander III wrote a letter complaining about the situation there, describing how the Finns harassed priests and only stopped when threatened with war. To make matters worse, in 1236, the Devastians, a Finnish tribe, led an uprising against the Swedes. While the Swedes were able to crush it, they knew they had to do something. Important side note, while we're certain that the Second Swedish Crusade occurred, we don't know when. Multiple chronicles and modern historians' estimates all vary in timing. For the sake of this video, I'm going to cite the Finnish historian Jarl Gallen and say that the Second Swedish Crusade occurred from 1230 to 1239, as it chronologically follows up the Devastian uprising and Pope Gregory IX's call to Christianize the Devastians. So what happened? Well, not much. The Swedes simply invaded and subjugated the Devastians and constructed Ham Castle, which helped reinforce Swedish control over the region. From 1249 onwards, most sources accept that Tavasti and southwestern Finland were part of the Kingdom of Sweden. At this point, most of you might be annoyed. We don't know for certain that the First Swedish Crusade occurred. We know that the Second Swedish Crusade occurred, but not when. So where's the guarantee that the Third Swedish Crusade is any better? Well, good news. Not only do we know when and if the Third Swedish Crusade occurred, but there's an actual chronology of the war. The Third Swedish Crusade occurred from 1293 to 1295 and was fought between the Kingdom of Sweden and the Karelians, another Finnish tribe, with support from the Novgorod Republic. Early on, Viborg Castle was constructed by the Swedish Lord High Constable Torkel Knutsson as a base of operations for the campaign. However, 1293 wasn't all too eventful. The Swedish army placed a garrison at Viborg and returned home in autumn. The next year, however, was different. In March of 1294, the Novgorod Republic sent an army to besiege Viborg. The Novgorodians were set to capture the city, but on March 30th, 1294, the day they sailed to the fort, warm winds from the southwest partly melted the ice surrounding the city, breaking it. This meant that the Novgorodians would need boats if they wanted to assault the city. The Swedish would revive later in the spring and capture the Karela fortress. This victory was short-lived, however, as the very next year, the Novgorod Republic sent an army to recapture the fortress. They succeeded, and only 2 Swedes were able to escape. Even though they were defeated, the Swedes weren't too worried, as they were still content with their victories from the previous year, and so the fighting died down, ending the Third Swedish Crusade. The Kingdom of Sweden and the Novgorod Republic would soon draw up a formal border between them. So, in conclusion, the Second and Third Swedish Crusades, wondered influential, played a key role in shaping Northern Europe. Not only did Sweden extend their influence, but it also spread Christianity to the Finns and defeated their Novgorodian rivals. So, now that we have everything else out of the way, it's time for the grand finale, the Lithuanian Crusade. Until then, have a great day. Throughout the 12th and 13th centuries, Northern European powers launched campaigns against the last pagan remnants of Europe. Over the course of a century, the Crusaders spread Christianity to the Baltic tribes and the Finnish tribes. Finally, all but one part of Europe remained, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, which fiercely maintained its pagan beliefs well into the 14th century. Let's get straight into it. Following the Great Prussian Uprising, the Teutonic Order further expanded and consolidated its control over the old Prussian tribes, and by 1283, the Prussians were well and truly subjugated. During this subjugation process, some Lithuanians, an old Prussian tribe, fled into Lithuania to avoid the wrath of the Teutonic Order. The Lithuanian Crusade would begin in the winter of 1283. The Teutonic Order's main goal was to capture the region of Samogitia, as its location served as a wedge that separated the Order's Prussian holdings from the Livonian Order, an autonomous branch of the Teutonic Order. The Order's first target was Vicene, a Lithuanian wooden hill fort along the Niemen River, which they captured and burned during the winter of 1283. In 1298, Lithuanian Grand Duke Vytenis attacked Courland. He was initially defeated twice by the Crusaders before allying with the rebelling citizens of Riga and scoring a victory at the Battle of Tureda. Hostilities would die down until 1303, when the Grand Duke would send 2,000 knights to guard their borders. In addition, in 1311, he launched an invasion into Masuria, a relatively underdefended area of the Prussian border. The Teutonic Order responded to this by sending military units into Semigalia, consolidating their control, and organizing around 20 raids into Samogitia. To defend their eastern border against the Lithuanians, the Teutonic Order erected numerous small fortresses and fortified houses, many constructed in strategically important locations, such as Niemen, Sovetsk, and Majovka. Grand Duke Vytenis would make one last grand attack before dying in 1315. Gediminas' reign saw the conflict with the Teutonic Order intensify. For starters, in 1325, through a series of marriages, he allied himself with the King of Poland, who, from 1327 to 1332, attacked the Teutonic Order in order to restore control over Pomerania. This conflict would be a failure for the Poles, as not only did they fail to restore control over the region, but they also lost Dobrzyń. To make matters worse, in the winter of 1329, King John of Bohemia joined the crusade on the side of the Teutonic Order and mustered an army to participate. This army would arrive in Samogotia in 1336 and capture the Lithuanian castle of Pilonai. The Teutonic Order would replace it with a new fortification named Byronberg. However, after withdrawing most of the army from the fortress, Gediminas led the Lithuanians to besiege and capture it. In 1341, Gediminas died, and fighting between the Teutonic Order and Lithuanians temporarily subsided. In 1345, the brothers Algirdas and Kęstutis ousted their brother Jaunatis and seized the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, establishing a diarchy and splitting the Grand Duchy between them. Algirdas controlled the land to the southeast, and Kęstutis controlled the land to the west, including Samogotia, so they picked up a lot of the slack of waging war. In 1348, the Teutonic Order defeated the Lithuanians at the Battle of Strava, weakening their power. The Order took advantage of this by raiding Siauliae and destroying the castle at Veluona. To avoid any further conflicts with the Teutonic Order, Kęstutis began negotiations with Pope Clement VI to Christianize the Grand Duchy in 1349. However, this would ultimately fail, as in October of that year, the Polish King Casimir III, who was the intermediary in these negotiations, invaded Volhynia, ruining Kęstutis' plan for Christianization. In 1358, Holy Roman Emperor Charles IV advocated for a peace between the Teutonic Order and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania on the condition that the duchy would convert to Christianity. Unfortunately, however, peace negotiations died down as Algirdas's demand for the Teutonic Order to withdraw from Lithuania was rejected by the Holy Roman Emperor. Fighting would only die down in 1261 when the Teutonic Order captured and detained Kęstutis. Unfortunately for the Order, Kęstutis would escape the next year and fighting would resume. And in April 1362, the Teutonic Order would destroy Kaunas Castle. For the next 8 years, the Order attacked Lithuania 20 more times, forcing the dual Grand Dukes to raise a massive army and confront the Order. They did so at the Battle of Rudo, and were defeated by the much more Teutonic force, marking the last serious threat by the Lithuanians. They would occasionally raid the Teutonic Order, but, for the time being, they wouldn't raise a proper army against the Order. Algirdas's death in 1377 began a power struggle in Lithuania, as his son Jogaila, his brother Kęstutis, and Kęstutis' son Vytautas all vied for power. In 1380, the Teutonic Order secretly signed a treaty with Jogaila, which promised him their support against Kęstutis. The following year, the Order assaulted the lands of Kęstutis and, playing off both sides, informed Kęstutis of the secret treaty. Kęstutis convened with the son, and, in August of 1381, they decided to attack Jogaila, beginning the Lithuanian Civil War of 1381 to 1384. In 1382, Jogaila tricked and captured Kęstutis and Vytautas. Kęstutis would die in captivity, and Vytautas would escape and flee to the Teutonic Order, where he would ally with them and be baptized in 1383. However, the next year, Vytautas would reconcile with his brother, ending the Lithuanian Civil War. Alongside that, he broke off his alliance with the Teutonic Order and burned down 2 of their castles. In the end, the Lithuanian Civil War of 1381 to 1384 would see Jogaila assume control of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. In order to combat the Teutonic Order, Jogaila decided to form a personal union with the Kingdom of Poland, which he did in 1385 after marrying Queen Jadwiga of Poland. In addition, he also adopted Catholicism, and finally, in 1387, Lithuania, the final pagan state, converted to Christianity. You would think that this would mark the end of the Lithuanian Crusade, but if you did, you would be wrong. From this point onwards, the Lithuanian Crusade would have evolved from a religious conflict to a political one. Lithuania would once again enter a civil war in 1389, as Jogaila's cousin Vytautas wanted control over the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, as its current ruler was very unpopular with the people. He tried to capture Vilnius, but was repelled, so he allied himself with the Teutonic Order. The next year, they once again failed to capture Vilnius. Over the next 2 years, no side would be able to score a decisive victory, so, as a compromise, Jogaila appointed Vytautas as the Grand Duke of Lithuania, while designating himself as the Supreme Duke, thereby maintaining control over his territories, while replacing the Grand Duke with someone more popular. 6 years later, the Teutonic Order would score a massive victory with the signing of the Treaty of Salamis, in which Vytautas relinquished his control over Samogitia. In 1399, the states of Eastern Europe would briefly ally to repel the Golden Horde, only to be defeated at the Battle of the Vorskla River. This was instrumental, because from that point onwards, the Lithuanians would cease expanding eastward, and would instead refocus their attention west to the Teutonic Order, a change in strategy that would soon be important for history. So at this point, everyone was on edge. The Polish and Lithuanians were displeased with the Teutonic Order due to their expansions and conflicts over the past 2 centuries, and the Order itself faced resistance from its Samogitian subjects. They first revolted in 1401, but were crushed in 1404, with Jogaila himself recognizing the Teutonic control over the region. However, in 1409, the Samogitians once again revolted, this time with help from the Lithuanians. This conflict escalated when the Teutonic Order threatened to invade Lithuania, after which Poland declared their support for the Lithuanians, beginning the Polish-Lithuanian Teutonic War. Initially, the Teutonic Order did well. However, on July 15, 1410, the Polish, Lithuanians, and Teutonic Order all met up at the famous Battle of Grunwald. This was a decisive defeat for the Order, marking the beginning of the Order's decline. In 1411, the Teutonic Order signed the Peace of Thorn, which relinquished their control over Samogitia and ended the Polish-Lithuanian Teutonic War. Finally, the Lithuanian Crusade ended in 1422 with the signing of the Treaty of Melno, in which the Teutonic Order forever dropped its claim on Samogitia. So, in conclusion, the Lithuanian Crusade was an important conflict that changed Eastern Europe's politics and culture. This period was key to Lithuania's eventual conversion to Christianity and its closer connections with Western Europe, marking a significant moment in European history. From this point, paganism was no longer a major religion in Europe. Honestly, after making videos only about European history, I'm ready to shift theaters. So if you want to see me talk about history on another continent, leave a comment. Otherwise, have a good day.